while other countries are busy going into AI, our kids can't even open a book and read it.
I remember when Nasir El-Rufai was the governor of Kaduna, and he gave the teachers primary school test, and the teachers who failed the test, he fired.
Africa, in general, is in a strange place where it is the autocrats who most want elections. You see, people, we used to be in a situation.
I'm not sure how the election setup works, because it's clear to me now what's happening in South Africa and Nigeria is if you're not in party election mode, then you're in state or local election mode.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Bad Natives podcast, where we have a couple of bad natives from across sub-Saharan Africa. I'm Adesua Giwal-Sage, live from Abuja.
And I'm Robert Kaushenga, the bad native from Kampala, recently returned from a wonderful trip to London to sell coffee.
I'm Feril Hafaji. I'm in Johannesburg, no longer in Dubai. Great to be with you.
I'm Charles Onyango Obo in Nairobi.
Well, welcome everyone. Before we get into today's topic, which is mostly democracy in Africa, I want to remind everyone to like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, your enemies, your coworkers, your manager at work who you want to distract. Just make sure that you share this. And if you're listening to us, you can watch us on YouTube. If you're watching us, you can listen to us anywhere you get podcasts. Welcome to the Bad Natives podcast. Hi guys, how's everyone doing? How is everyone's week going?
You
Yes.
forgot one category of people that they should share it with.
Their enemies?
No, they're exes.
You know what? Maybe I should share this with my
You really
exes.
think the bad natives can cure a broken relationship?
Right. Take it away, guys.
How's everyone doing? How's everyone doing? For real, how was Dubai? Are you glad to be back home?
I'm so glad to be back home. But it was really interesting, Adesua, watching the Trump caravan through the Middle East. And then today, all the South Africans have gone to plead for our trade deal in Washington. And we don't have trillions of dirham or dollars for Donald Trump. So I'm watching that. Huh?
Oh, that's very good.
Charles.
Robert,
yeah.
Adesua, this is the one thing that I think Charles will understand. I spent 3 days being a street vendor. so I was standing. I've always been a corporate executive, and then now here I was in the corridors of the exhibition hall, hustling people. Please come in and taste Ugandan coffee. Oh, please, do you want to have your coffee fix? Please come on in. It was my job to hustle people in. I'd never done that before. So it was a very humbling experience. I will never again look at street vendors the same way. Those guys really work for their money. I saw it, but it was worth the experience. It was really good.
That's lovely. The way you're hawking your coffee in London is how we have to hawk the Bad Natives podcast across the internet and the interweb soon. But I want to go to Charles because you were the first person I saw that posted that Martha Karua had been detained in Tanzania. She's since been deported, and I was in shock because I was just with her in Harvard when I went for the Africa Development Conference. We're talking about democracy and democratic transitions, the future of Africa and African states. And I want to know how you feel about, her detention in Tanzania and what is really happening in Tanzania with Tundu Lissu. And, it seems like there's a lot of repression of opposition in that area.
Yeah, Tanzania is is really surprising. From the time of the President Mufli, it has taken a downward turn. So when he died and President Samia Suluhu took over, so what we are seeing in Tanzania is a very, very dramatic democratic recession. When Samia Suluhu came in, there was a couple of months in which it seemed that Tanzania would go back on the path it had veered from, the path of democratic recovery. But with the elections coming in October, Samia Suluhu's government has turned out perhaps to be the most repressive of the recent one. So Tundu Lissu, the key opposition figure, was arrested, charged with treason. His party Chadema was basically banned from running for contesting the election. So there has been a lot of this solidarity movement from the rest of East Africa. So Martha Karua, who used to be a justice minister, the democracy activist, was a presidential candidate. Her and a couple of colleagues went to some of them to attend the trial, but I think Martha was trying to be part of his legal team. So they were rounded up. She was the lucky one. She and a couple others were held at the airport and deported. But there have been other East Africans who were actually thrown, in jail. Um, the prominent Kenyan activist Boniface Mwangi, a Ugandan activist called Autocracy. So it's taken a very, very bad turn downward. And the number of people arrested, the number of people being killed. So it's a very, very worrying turn of events.
I hear you. It's very worrying, but it's not the only, turn of worrying events that I'm seeing. And I really want us to talk about this in terms of, you're smiling. Why are you smiling?
because because I am not worried actually. you
Why
now
aren't you worried? I'd like for you to expand on that. Why aren't you worried
hmm,
about this, the
and
democratic
yeah,
transitions we're
because
seeing?
I am going to borrow from a very well-known Italian philosopher called Antonio Gramsci. And one of his quotes, he says, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." So the fact that you have this monstrous behavior is not a sign that this monstrous behavior is going to be around for a long time. It actually means that a new world is being born. And I want us to look at the activists rather than the Suluhu Samias and all of these autocrats that are trying to preserve an old establishment from dying. So you want to look at the young people like Boniface Mwangi, like Agatha Atuhire, the sort of growing coalition at a regional level. You see, before these countries used to struggle for democracy on their own. Now there is a growing, almost pan African or pan regional similarities of people sharing their struggles. The fact that Martha is emerging as the justice champion in 3 countries in East Africa is very powerful. And earlier on in a private conversation with Firio, I pointed out that we need to look at this political history of Africa in cycles. And really, essentially, what is ending is, or what I see as the tail end of something that started, ironically, in 1990. And it starts in South Africa with the unbanning of the ANC and the release of Nelson Mandela. Now, that unleashed a democratic process on the continent because apartheid was, in a sense, the last struggle for liberation in Africa. So it took away the justification of many one party states, these autocrats. So we started to a new culture of elections. And the climax of that movement was the removal of Moi in Kenya and the arrival of Mwai Kibaki. In a sense, after that, we've really witnessed a decline, a slow decline of that process. And I was laughing with Furio that the highlight of that decline starts with when Jacob Zuma carries out a coup d'etat against Mbeki. And so that attempt to return at autocracy, the climax of it being John Magufuli in Tanzania. It means that that plus the farce that elections became in Africa, where incumbents were stealing elections and beating people up in order to stay in power, that farce has ended. We have a new electorate, a new generation of people, younger, who are coming into the political space. They may not have force, they may not have the experience yet, but I would like to see the emerging forces that are threatening,
Yes.
that have threatened these people so much that the only solution they now have is repression. And one of the most
You know,
powerful images I saw was the fist of defiance by Tundu Lissu. The first time we've seen him since he was detained, he was still defiant and he was sending a message. And so the fact that these younger people are able to speak out and act in solidarity is for me a promise, a peep into what the future can be. The repression is a sign of fear. It is a sign that there is no more political entrepreneurship on the part of the establishment to, or even to enter a concession. And we know from history that repression, although it can do a lot of damage in the short term, it doesn't stay around long enough to secure power. And so that's why I was smiling that maybe the beginning of the end of a bad experiment on democracy has started. We now look forward to a probably brighter one where these younger people emerge with better thinking.
you know, I mean, I hate to always be the pessimistic young voice here, but maybe I don't hate to be it because I just sent someone a video. I had a video I did on Ibrahim Traore, and it has 200 hate comments that TikTok has had to withhold off my page because there's so many hate comments of me saying that he's in fact an autocrat who took over from another autocrat. People have mistaken my tribe and they think it's because I'm from a particular tribe that I'm saying this, or that I'm being paid by USAID. So apparently I'm USAID funded. But I'm in West
It's
Africa,
close.
and in West Africa, in West Africa, we're seeing a rise of the autocrats. We're seeing a rise of military dictators, and even the non-military, like Nassim Bejos in Togo, has been there for 20 years, has changed his title. So we're not seeing this maybe exercise in democracy in the way that you are in the East. We do have a few, particularly Anglophone Africa and Ghana and Nigeria, we're experiencing it. Obviously, we did see what happened in Ivory Coast recently, but Ferial, I would like to ask because I know if I'm being pessimistic, I'm sure you'll be optimistic. So, how do you feel about these democratic transitions and also like when we talk about democracy in Africa, because I now know a lot of young people who even question whether or not we should be democratic.
Thank you, Adesua. So, the one thing I've learned in our 10 episodes together is that it's impossible to paint in such broad brushstrokes as I used to do. And how do I learn that is I was very influenced by Robert's treatise, you'll remember, on why the Namibian election was so interesting and what that showed us about a new path for democracy, and then also what had happened in Botswana. I'm also excited by the growth of these young student movements that I've seen, or young people's movements that I've seen in the past couple of years in Nigeria, in Kenya, and now going viral across the rest of East Africa. Obviously, South African politics has always included that measure of young people telling an older generation what will happen and what won't happen. And of course, the symbol of that is Bob's friend, Julius Malema, who I'll still try and work on to try and get us here, because he is the symbol of what happens when young people go into power. Do they merely take on the masks of the old, or do they bring us a fresh kind of politics? And I think the jury is still out on whether Julius will do that or not. So I guess my answer is it's difficult to paint in single brushstrokes, but obviously I'm someone who looks out for hope and for emerging trends which show that there is greater democratization, that we've in fact built on that period rather than seeing it as the end of one and the start of a deeper move to autocracy and strongman politics.
Adesua, I want to add a little thing to you and your generation first, and your role as somebody who is involved in telling the African story. One of the most powerful approaches in from the history of struggle in Africa is the effect or the effect of symbolism, and leaders who stand out as beacons of what is right and focus the struggle, which is why you see that somebody like Julius Malema, without even trying, without even having visited any African capitals, is a symbol of resistance, a symbol of struggle. It is why these foreign groups are trying to portray Ibrahim Traore as the Pan Africanist. So that, as a generation, your generation, it's important for you to identify the Martha Karuas, the Tundu Lisus, the individuals on the African continent that truly represent the struggle for the future, and bring them forward as images of what we should aspire to be and what we should aspire for.
Definitely. I really appreciate that you brought up Malema's role and the role of symbols, because for me, as somebody who is has studied African history, as somebody who studied Sankara and studied Mandela, and studied, the Black consciousness movement, I understand symbolism. I understand why it's important for us to have Pan-African, symbols and leadership. And Malema is somebody who's very, very sharp with his words and sharp with his criticism of neocolonialism and this movement. But because honestly, I've been feeling very emotional very recently because of all that's happening in this region in West Africa. Um, and yeah, but I really appreciate that you brought up symbols. But if we're going to symbolism or where things are tough, Charles, you often speak about South Sudan and and how it can be vicious in South Sudan. And and we are talking about a vice president who's under house arrest, I believe, since March. Um, what does South Sudan say for I don't know, the future, particularly of the Central African region? Like, what would you say we should learn from South Sudan's situation right now? Because it's like they don't fear death. So
South Sudan has a problem because we are talking of symbols. They had John Garang, who was this larger than life figure, and his death left a vacuum which they have struggled to fill. Because one of the things that happened, Garang represented the more pan-Sudan, pan-Africanist tendency. So the Salva Kirs represent the more parochial tradition of South Sudan politics, and so the thing went asunder very quickly. But it ties to the what you and Bob have said. We are true, symbols are important, but my sense is that young people are not clamoring. If you look over any of their symbols, there is none of them who is, in the Mandela mode, liberal democratic. All of them are fascinated by strong figures because they are disillusioned that democracy hasn't delivered the goods. They want the strong man who comes in, arrests the corrupt, make sure that trains run on time, that there's electricity. So that's what I mean, that there is a very, very huge desire for, benevolent dictators. Most young people whom I follow, and when I see their work, they're fascinated by the benevolent
But but
dictator.
but
But yeah,
Charles, there's nothing new. We
yeah, yeah,
when we were younger, we were fascinated by Jerry Rawlings, by Sankara, by all these guys who were in the bush fighting, if you recall.
yeah. No, no. But you see, but there was a duality. You still had the Mandelas coming
Mm.
up, and we had all this generation of John Kufuors and all of those. So that is there. But now you don't see it. But the other contradictory thing which I see in Africa now, and it touches on what's happening in South Sudan, Burkina Faso, as you're saying, is that Africa in general is in a strange place where it is the autocrats who most want elections. You see, because we used to be in a situation where it was the more democratic one, but now it is the autocrats who are fascinated by election. They want they you know they want to hold election, and it is really a shift which I don't know how we will navigate.
Charles, on that, I want to ask Adesua a question directly, because
I knew it was
with
coming.
that,
I knew.
I have to ask you, Adesua, that because
Hmm.
the other side of that same coin is transactional politics and how the
Mm.
establishment is subverting any form of opposition through money and buying politicians to join their parties. Tell us about what's happening in your place there with with hordes and hordes of politicians defecting. I hope Natasha hasn't gone anywhere.
Natasha hasn't gone. She has a new case against the Senate President for defamation, I believe. Natasha hasn't gone, but she's fighting an uphill battle like we all knew she would be fighting. Every day I am in National Assembly now, it's nearly every day you have
Mhm.
defection. And people are defecting to the ruling party, the All Progressives Congress, the APC. Now, the thing that we have here, one day actually, the oldest member of parliament, I think they call him Methuselah. I don't know if it's in front of his face or behind his back, but he's been in parliament unbroken since 1999 as a member of PDP. But he and every single lawmaker from Delta State left the PDP and went to the APC. So every PDP lawmaker from Delta State is now a member of the APC. It's a clean sweep, clean sweep. Um, Before President Tinubu came in, we spoke about, not we, but a lot of people who criticized him spoke about state capture and state capture in Lagos. And we spoke about how he was able to kill opposition in Lagos. Lagos has effectively been a one party state since 1999. Every governor we've had have been from his original team, either his chief of staff or his assistant of this or whatever. They all come from his team, not even just his party, but his tight circle. Now, considering this, and this is over 20 years of democracy. Lagos is one of the biggest economies in Africa, even just stand alone. We said there is state capture, and that these people have perfected the art of state capture, and they perfected the art of killing opposition to themselves and their politics. In a way, as you said, people love a strong man. You see Tinubu fans, they're so fascinated and so excited by this idea of he's a political genius. Look at everybody is running to his party. This is genius. Sorry. So I mean, but also there's nothing new under the
Wow.
sun. There's nothing new under the sun for me. The PDP was once this very strong party, and nobody thought that anyone would be able to
So,
break the PDP's hold.
sorry,
So,
can you just clarify for me which one was the party of Obasanjo and which one was so which one is the original
so
party
the
of Obasanjo?
APC has produced. So the original party of Obasanjo is the PDP. And the PDP gave us Obasanjo, Yar'Adua, Goodluck Jonathan, and the APC has given us Buhari and Tinubu. Obviously, in those years, we can't say good things have happened to Nigeria's economy, GDP
Mm.
outcomes. But again, the PDP wasn't all swimming, and there was a big movement and an anti-corruption movement to push the PDP out of power around 2015, which is when Buhari came, right? And the APC was a coalition of a lot of different parties. So it's always been a party of strange bedfellows. And the biggest coalition blocks were the AD of the Southwest, which is mostly Yoruba, and but AD which is ACN, and the CPC of the North, which is where Buhari's bloc came from and El Rufai's bloc came from. And now you're seeing that CPC Northern Bloc of the APC have problems within the party. And you saw El Rufai leave the party. But what is happening is that power is being consolidated primarily across the South, and by President Tinubu ahead of the 2027 elections. I mean, for a lot of people, they feel 2027 is a done deal. There's no use running against him. I would see why. It might be better to focus on 2031
So
at
Adesua,
this point.
can I ask you something? It sounds like Nigeria is like South Africa. We're almost in permanent electioneering mode, and so the attention to statecraft is like a sideshow happening somewhere over there. Is that you are constantly in power struggle to position, and for me, that's a big part of what's happening in our countries. You don't have time to spend watching your electricity supply, your logistics corridors, and building up new sectors of the economy because everybody is constantly positioning for the next election. And maybe that's why there's this attraction to benevolent dictators, who I think is often code for Rwanda's Paul
Stability.
Kagame. Does that
Yes.
sound to you right at all?
I definitely think so. Everyone is looking forward to the next elections. It's basically a year and a half of governance before they start posturing for the next election because they
Wow.
have to prepare for primaries and
Same
they're
here.
building their war chests. They're building the money. So by now, I was trying to interview a minister recently, and he's focused on election. And it's we're in 2025 May, and I'm trying to ask him about his job, and it's like I'm disturbing him from what is important. So I definitely agree with you there. I definitely agree with you there. The
I,
focus is on this constant electioneering.
I wanted to drop an issue taking on from that if people are focused on what they think is important, they're actually leaving what's actually important. And one of the things, and Charles, you're probably best placed to talk about this, is the things like social services, particularly education, have been neglected with devastating consequences.
Yeah, it's the I think, I mean, if you look at the data, I think there are only 4 or 5 African countries that are making any progress in terms of school outcomes, examination outcome, and all those things. The rest are really in decline, and it's actually in the countries, the more democratic ones, the South Africas, the Nigerias, where as you say, politics has become the new economy and industry. Those countries are posting very, very poor outcomes, and I think that those are some of the things that feed into this clamor for an effective authoritarian figure who gets things done. Because in the majority of countries, I mean, barring uh, the Seychelles and Mauritius, it's really in the kind of the strongman countries where you are seeing very good results around health, around education. And we we are going to be on that track, I believe, for some years before it also burns out and we get another one. So that, the point at which we are, we should prepare at least 10, 15 years of a very, very difficult period, including parties, ruling parties that swallow, the opposition. In Kenya, you have this kind of thing where, as they say in Kenya, the government is in opposition and the opposition is in government. It's crazy.
But Charles, I want to ask here because you said the strongman countries are doing well, but we see countries
Mm.
like Mozambique and Namibia doing very well, having higher human development index. It seems to be functioning places. So why do those places work, and then you have a democracy struggle to give us those same outcomes in different African countries?
Yeah. No, 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 sorry, I didn't catch you there. This one.
Okay, so this is for Charles or Ferial, because Ferial, this is your area, in Southern Africa. But you said that you see a lot of the strongman countries work. Charles, you said that the strongman countries work, and you see them having good health outcomes and such things. But we see the same thing happen in Mozambique and Namibia. And these are not strongman countries; these are working democracies. So how are they able to accomplish great outcomes in those countries that are highly democratic, but it's not being able to be replicated anywhere? Because for me, with this strongman argument, I also see a lot of strongman countries fail. So
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, Pharaoh can speak this, but what I've seen is that in the democratic, the more countries which have a neoliberal democratic models, the ones that succeed are the small states. The big ones struggle, and so that if I was just looking at data out of Equatorial Guinea. Equatorial Guinea, I mean, it's a horrible place. This dictator has been there almost 50 years. The Nguemas. But man, he's got some very good outcomes there. It's a good country to be a citizen, to go to school in, or to go to hospitals. But your neighbor's Pharaoh, maybe you've got a closer look at this, and you might just explain to us those where those variations come from.
Mm. So I try and be a student of Amartya Sen and the idea of development as freedom. And so what Mozambique, Botswana, and Namibia have in common is they have strong media and they have independent judiciaries and quite open economies. And maybe that helps explain some of the successful human development indicator improvements they've enjoyed recently, but also the fact that, like Charles says, Adesua, that these are smaller countries. I'm not sure how their election setup works, because it's clear to me now what's happening in South Africa and Nigeria is if you're not in party election mode, then you're in state or local election mode. So I think they also have single elections, which means that you're not in these perpetual cycles. But I do think the bigger answer for me is that you don't have famine, whether you have free media, like Sen says, is that they have these democratic institutions which function and function quite well in the three countries that you mentioned. Obviously, Mozambique had that big and troubled election, but they seem to have found each other in the past 3 to 6 months. There's an accord between the opposition and the government, which won.
Definitely. Now, Bob, how do you see it? This idea of strongman versus democracy or democratic institutions in Africa, and also, do you think it's an and or? Because I sometimes feel that when we're having these discussions, it's as though we must put them in opposition to each other. But there are very many different types of authentic African ways of organizing society that I don't think it's really reflected in this nation state system. So do you think strongman or democracy is better? Or do you think we need to find something in the middle?
I have a totally different thought process. I think that the politics and the way they are handled or managed is about how effective and efficient the process is in intermediating resource allocations. So if some what any mechanism, whether strongman or democratic, will be found acceptable as long as there is a minimum social contract, people are able to do their business and make a bit of money, people are able to get social services, as long as the existing method, I mean, because you have a system in China that for all intents and purposes is autocratic, but it has one contract with its people to take them out of poverty and deliver prosperity. So the problem arises when the political system fails to deliver the basic function of a state: protection of life and property, uh, sharing of public resources equitably or in some form of equitable manner, and creating opportunity for the broad majority. The moment the state fails to do that, then how politics is organized becomes contested. And that contestation is either resolved violently or is resolved by purchasing people or transactional politics. So the people we're describing as strongmen, the reason they are appearing to be strongmen is because they are insisting without much debate on certain outcomes for the general public. But when they insist on taking everything for themselves, then it becomes a pure and outright violent contestation. So I think I would look at it from the other way. Whatever the system is, it must create opportunity for its people, it must protect its people against any sort of threats to their lives and property, and it must allow some kind of basic freedom to exist in the country. Without that, it won't matter what the system is. It will just mean it will be a continuous contestation, as you have said, in the big democracies where it is election mode throughout, or in the small places where they're able to provide services, they allow the strong man to have leeway. So I think we need to relook at the constructs of our politics.
Definitely. And one of these major things that when we talk about the dividends of democracy is how Nigerians often put it. But when we talk about one of the things that we expect to get from leadership, it's education. We are in crisis in Nigeria, but we are in crisis across sub-Saharan Africa. I saw the UNESCO statistic that Charles shared that 9 out of 10 children in sub-Saharan Africa cannot read and understand a simple sentence by age 10. And I can see that from my TikTok comments because comprehension is lacking. I feel like we're fertile ground for propaganda. It's just, we have created fertile ground for propaganda for a servant class, and in terms of this global world that we're in, but the education crisis is something that personally it's personally frightening for me. Ferio, how is South Africa faring? Because I don't think Nigeria and Uganda are doing very well.
We have an obsession with tables. So every time those international literacy benchmark tests comes out that show us at the bottom of the tables for our little ones can't read for comprehension. They can't do simple math, and we know that we're now away from the internet age into the AI age. And so then we have this national soul searching about why a country that spends the same percentage of its budget that Nordic countries do on education, why don't we have better outcomes? And we know all the answers to these things, but implementing it really is such a mishmash. And so, a really interesting small example, we have this little province in the middle of the country called the Free State. And they struck up a partnership with the local university under a visionary professor. And that partnership has delivered the goods. So it's increasingly these small efforts that become macro ones that really interest and excite me. Similarly, in the heartbeat province where I live, Gauteng, where Joburg is, good people just started a dashboard so that you could see where things are, you could see which districts or schools were performing well or not. And they've made interventions in those, which is lifting the outcome year by year. So it's small, small steps, and it's usually innovative people and strong partnerships with your civil society. And I suppose what I wanted to throw in when I saw we were going to talk about this is I just love people like Fred Swaneker and your people who start Spark schools in South Africa. And these examples across our continent where good leaders, be they come from business or the academies, are just starting these amazing examples. Obviously, we're not seeing it in the big stats yet. It's not showing through at a macro level. But for me, they're like starfish. You know, if you throw one back and see, throw another one back, eventually you see systemic change beginning to happen. And for me, I watch that. I find it extremely exciting, and you can find it on almost every country in our continent. I have my rose-colored spectacles on there, Adesua.
I, you know, for us in Uganda, there have been two major tragedies on education. First of all, our schooling system suffered the longest lockdown in the world during COVID. Ugandan
Are
children
you
were,
are you sure? Nigeria is always coming to
yes,
win this competition of lockdown.
no, 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 you
Oh.
can't beat
No,
us on
no,
that.
no.
No, Adesuwa, that trophy is ours. There is no way you're winning it. Our kids were out of school for 2 years, 2 complete years. So, so the schools were really reopened seriously in 2023. Now, during that time, there was a deterioration. I mean, the kids didn't get any schooling. And in fact, another trophy we have, which you won't beat us on, is that we had the highest cases of school going age girl pregnancies because the kids were just at home. So, so that disaster, nobody has taken any measures to correct that problem. Then we introduced, as if that was not bad enough, we introduced a new curriculum without preparing the teachers or the system. So when the results came out this year, it was a complete scandal. But there is a second problem, which is even bigger, that the person in charge of the education sector is the wife of the president. Now, that complicates accountability for the performance. People cannot openly criticize what's going on because they've got to be politically correct. And there
Hmm.
is a different problem because now Parliament can't summon her to explain. Nobody can criticize because everybody is sensitive about doing that. And as a result, we're all watching the collapse of what used to be one of the best education systems, or certainly one of the most dynamic ones on the African continent, just going down the drain. And nobody seems able to do anything about it because of the political supervision. So,
Hmm.
again, it comes back to the issue we were discussing earlier that the political leadership on the continent that is supposed to be judged on the basis of provision of social services is distracted by holding on to power and is so vicious and interprets every single criticism as a threat to its hold on power that it responds violently or intolerantly. And as a result, we're missing out. While other countries are busy going into AI, our kids can't even open a book and read it.
You know, Bob, something that I remember, because you're talking about political correctness. I remember when Nasir El-Rufai was the governor of Kaduna, and he gave the teachers' primary school test, and the teachers who failed the test, he fired. And the whole country was just upset. People were like, how can he do that? I said, they're failing primary school exam. Some of these were even secondary school teachers. And this idea of being able to hold people to account is that Nigeria just had, they wrote exams and the failure rate was like half of the students failed. Turns out they had a technical glitch, and they then gave the students 2 days' notice, 370,000 students, 2 days' notice to come back and rewrite these exams. And the head of the JAM, the registrar of the JAM, because these exams are the exams you have to take to enter university. Some people have taken it up to 7 times because it only lasts once and there's not enough university spaces. The registrar comes on TV, he's crying, he's like, it was a mistake. There's at least one girl who had taken her life over this, her failing this
Oh yeah.
exam. And you would not believe, or maybe you will because it's Nigeria, this has become a tribal issue. Most of the centers who had
Ah,
this issue were in the southeast. The Southeast Caucus has come out and asked the registrar to resign, that there needs to be accountability. They're saying it's because he's Yoruba. It's because the Southeast, you don't want Igbo people to succeed. It has now left education outcomes, proper technology, actual, accountability and governance, and it has become a tribal issue. There's nothing that cannot become a tribal issue in Nigeria, honestly. So, Charles, I want to.
but Adesua, before you
Because
go, I really want to go back to the example that Furio gave of Fred Swanika. I think
Mhm.
he tells us that plus another one out of Rwanda. You may not know this, Adesua, but in Rwanda, the international schools failed because the public schooling system was way superior to
Mm.
what the private schools were bringing in. So there are places where schooling, especially in the private initiatives, that Africa can learn from. And I think on this issue, if we can't have an international conference, here is an event for the bad natives to curate. We call all the big players who have succeeded, the Fred Swanikas, there are, I know, private schools that are doing so well on the continent, and ask them, what are you doing right that we can learn from you? So that would be my suggestion.
I think we'll get Dele to invite us to Africa in the world, and that'll be our panel. Agreed.
Right. But there is something else that we need to touch on, the impact of this, the social impact. Because in the majority of countries, the elite have been able to secede and give their kids nice private education. So something that I see happening, you see it in Kenya, you see it in Uganda, that you see, because education was the path to social mobility and equalization. So now, because these kids, the ones who go to the best schools, the ones who can do code and all those things, they're already kids from, the middle class. They are getting all the best jobs. So it is really, really frightening, the inequality that this is creating. And actually I think that the the social impact of this system, where there are very good private schools and hopeless state schools, it is, in a few years we are really going to pay a price for it, because I don't think it is tenable that privileged people will have the best opportunities. I mean, you go to some of these IT companies, some of these banks and things like that. Most of the kids, they are from middle class schools. They all went to private schools, so it's not tenable.
Right.
Yes, I definitely agree with you there. I think that's where we're going to end this episode before we do our parting shots. because yes, it's definitely not tenable, and it doesn't seem like people understand the. For me, I say it's a ticking time bomb. If you have a largely uneducated, unemployable, unemployed youth population, and you have failing social service, illiterate youth growing up with no opportunities. So that I'm not surprised by what we're seeing these days. But I think we should have our parting shot so we can keep this under an hour. I was like, oh, am I gonna be able to do this? I think we're able to do this. So who wants to
Mm.
start with their parting shots? I have no rules for parting shots. Maybe I should go first. Ooh, I
Yes.
think I'm going to go first. I'm going to keep this
We have
in on the
we
topic.
have one rule. We have one rule at
Yes.
this way. Charles is always the last. So
No, 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 no. Today I come in peace.
So this is my parting shot. My parting shot is a little story. A Nigerian man challenged an Englishman in English because the Englishman was being slightly racist or ignorant or whatever. And the Nigerian man said he's a linguist and he would score higher than the Englishman in a test. And that if he didn't, he would leave England. Now they both took the exam. The Englishman scored 83. The Nigerian man, 79. He was beaten. He was beaten badly. Now my problem is he's now saying he's not leaving the country, and you have Nigerians say he should even be proud. He scored 79, and the Englishman only scored 83. I said, only he beat him. You people, this is clear. I don't understand what's happening. So my party shot is for that Nigerian man
That's
and
a
his
good
UK
it's
residency.
a good
He's
story.
beating him. He's beating him. Why are we saying it's not even that much? It's like 4 points. He beat him. He beat him.
That's a good story.
disdain what you can't have.
I want to go next. So many years ago, when I was the judge of the CNN Multi Choice African Journalist of the Year Awards,
That's
there
where
was a
we first
young
met.
Yes, there was a young man who regularly won for the quality of his work and the quality of his mind. And then he became a politician, and that young man is Boniface Wangi. And I just want to give a big shout out to his bravery in going to Tanzania to protest. I know he was arrested, but this is for Bonnie.
Okay, I guess it's now me, and I want to start on a really sad and disturbing note. So there is Bobby Wine's bodyguard who was arrested, or he was disappeared, and then the president's son and the command, who is also the commander of the forces, admitted to having him in the basement of his office, basically being tortured. But that video has come out of him in court. The guy is broken. I mean, that when you look at him, it is a very, very painful thing of what another human being can do to someone else for absolutely no reason. And I think for Ugandans, that video has really been disturbing. So that's on a really sad note, and I'll share it with Jonah so it can be shown here. But on a much happier note, guys, I'm going to ask for permission to share a link with you for a short film that has been done by Ugandans, and the subject matter is disinformation on the internet, the things we've been talking about. It's called Call 112. There are little elements in our local language that you may not understand, but the acting, the filming, the storyline is absolutely brilliant. So I will share with you guys Call 112 because I think it has brought out the threats to freedom of expression and the manipulations that we've been talking about.
Yeah, mine is a happy one, and I have to go to Mzansi, Pharaoh's homeland for this one. There is an artist, and I don't know whether you know her, Pharaoh Marlene Dumas.
Yes.
Marlene Dumas is a South African artist. She's now 71, and she sold her painting at auction for 13.6 million. But the thing about that, it is the highest price that a painting by a woman has ever collected, not just in Africa but in the world. So
Wow.
it was a good piece,
Yeah.
to see that.
And that's why you have hope. And
I
don't
have
go
hope for
Steve
what's
Jobs
selling
in
my
English.
art.
Oh, by the way, I saw there is this story about a Ghanaian musician called Aisi.
Mhm.
This guy produced a song called "Can I Live" like 2-3 years ago, and all of a sudden it has gone viral. All I can say, just go on YouTube, call up Aisi, and listen to "Can I Live." You will thank me.
Right away. See you
Like.
guys.
Well, thanks
Thank
for
you, bye.
watching.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share the Bad Natives podcast. I've told you the list of people who apply to be shared with. Bob has added your exes to that list, so make sure you're trying to elevate them. Maybe you wouldn't have left them if they had this knowledge. So make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Leave a review, drop a comment, let us know how you're finding our little podcast. Thank you guys for this episode.
Thank you.
Bye.